if you use if you use economics enough, and you really use it to understand the world, you can find the numbers often, not all the time, but often. Again, I learned that from economic history because it's commonly said, oh, long ago they didn't have any numbers, so we don't have any data, as people always call it. Well, things in the word data comes from Latin. It means things given. And in economic history, we don't just take the things given, we go for capta, as you'd say it in Latin, the things seized. So we go and we find the numbers. Well, over the decades, I mean, we're talking about the 1970s when I was at Chicago, and then in the 80s I became a humanist at the University of Iowa. I studied I studied Plato and Aristotle and all the rest. I learned Latin and some Greek, and then eventually, after 2000, I became a professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago, and I was a professor of English literature as well as economics and history. So I broadened. And then in the 2000s, I came back to, so to speak, economic history. I hadn't ever left it entirely, but my main focus was on learning to be a humanist and learning about what the ancients called rhetoric, about the art of persuasion. And I gradually came to see in the 1990s, that persuasion is what runs the world. I had started by pointing out that economics itself has a rhetoric, as a way of arguing. And this way of arguing is in metaphors and stories. Metaphors are comparisons of one field with another. The great Chicago economist Gary Becker compared crime to small business. So criminals, he said, are like entrepreneurs. And then he compared marriage with economic transactions and so on. So he was a poet, so to speak. He was using metaphors to compare one thing or another. And we also use stories. Those are two extremes of the rhetorical techniques that people use in a free society to persuade each other. On the one side is metaphor, and on the other side are stories. And it's obvious that our stories are very important. The story that we Chicago School economists told about your country, about Chile, was that once upon a time, Chile was poor. Then my students and Milton Friedman's students, and above all, Alito Harberger's students, came back to Chile from the University of Chicago, and then Chile became rich, or at least much better off than it was. And that's a story. It's got a beginning, middle, and end. And it obviously plays a part in economic policy and obviously in economic history and economic thinking. So as I said, in the early 2000s, I came back to economic history. At first through a book called The Bourgeois Virtues, great big thick thing, which was a defense ethically of what we call capitalism. I don't like the word capitalism. I think it's a scientifically misleading word, but still, let's go with it. Capitalism. And I had, when I was young, I was a Marxist. Then I slowly converted away from socialism to Chicago School and eventually Austrian economics. And I became much more sympathetic with capitalism and saw its great fruit, its great productivity that enriched the world, as in Chile, when you allowed it to take place. And I started to see, or in that first volume of what became 3 volumes, I was defending capitalism from its enemies. Now, I had just then become a Christian. 1998, I converted from being a non-religious person entirely. This was after my gender change, which happened in 1995. I looked for something deeper and came to the Anglican Church, kind of a light version of Catholicism, and became a Christian. And so I was trying in that first book to show that you could be both a Christian and a capitalist or a consumer at the same time. But then I realized that I might have a piece here of the explanation of how we got so rich. I mean, in 1800 in the world, in modern American or Chilean prices, the average person in the world spent the equivalent of $2 a day. Now, there's still some countries in the world, Chad or South Sudan, where people get along on $2 a day. And it's a terrible life. They cook over campfires, they have very little clothing, they aren't educated, et cetera, et cetera. So $2 a day was where we all came from. Your ancestors and mine were these unspeakably poor people from the beginning of Homo sapiens. 200,000 or 300,000 years, we've been the one race we have, which is Homo sapiens, starting in Africa and spreading around the world, $2 a day. There were upsurges of 100% here and there in the Song dynasty in China, and in a few other places, but then it always reverted to about $2 a day. And now in the world, the average, including lots of very poor countries, in the same prices, to the extent you can do that, is $50 a day. So imagine, you can imagine in even in Chile and the United States, getting along on $50 a day. It's not wonderful, but it's you can live. $2 is, woo, boy, that's terrible. And that was the change. Think of the magnitude. The engineers among you always ask how big, and that's correct. That's a very important scientific point. How big was it? It wasn't 100%. It wasn't the kind of change in incomes you can get from redistribution, making poor people more equal to rich people. That maybe causes the poor to get 100% better off, but no, it's not 100%. It's 2,500%, 2,500% increase in income per head from 1800, to the average in the world now. And I saw from the first book that maybe it was a change in the attitude towards the bourgeoisie, as I call them, the middle class, the entrepreneurs, the business people, that explains the modern world, that explains how we got rich. So in the second volume, called, let's see, what is it called? Bourgeois Dignity. I went through all the other, most of them, I mean, not every single one, but most of the explanations for what's not very sensibly called the Industrial Revolution. I call it the Great Enrichment. And there are basically two kinds of explanation. From the left, from the socialist side, the explanation is exploitation. This is sort of pure Marx. And you in your university educations have encountered this argument very frequently. Slavery is supposed to have caused the enrichment or the exploitation of the working class. The argument here is that you take from the working class or from the third world these riches, and you, I mean the entrepreneur back in England or the United States, accumulates capital, therefore out of that. And out of that accumulation of capital comes enrichment. Now, there are many problems with this argument on the left from exploitation. It's popular. I mean, the idea that Europe became rich because of imperialism is one of these exploitation stories. And they don't make a lot of sense. You know, if you're in Britain and you want to exploit someone, what would be the point of conquering India, which was a bunch of poor people? No, conquer France. If you want to steal from people, find where the money is and go after that. So there's something, and if you exploit the working class or the third world to get accumulation, why did you need to do that? Why couldn't you have done it long before? People have been exploiting each other for millennia. I mean, the old joke about socialism is, under capitalism, man exploits man. Under socialism, it's the other way around. And how does exploitation make everybody rich is the basic question. Because though there are poor people in Chile and the United States, there are many fewer than there were. Many fewer people are cooking on campfires and don't have any clothing and so forth. Here's a number that encapsulates that. In 1960, as recently as 1960 in the world, when I started university, out of the 5 billion people in the world, 4 billion were still at the $2 a day level. And only 1 billion were like the United States or I don't know, France or something, and were better off. Now, there are 8 billion people in the world, and 6 billion are at the roughly the $50 a day figure or much higher. In the United States, at about $130 a day. In Switzerland, it's 180. So out of the 8, and there are only 2 billion who are still down at the $2 a day, or maybe someone higher, but anyway, way down, very poor. That is the absolute number has gone down. No, actually, I think I'm doing this wrong. I think it's more like 7 billion are higher, very much higher than $2 a day, and 1 billion. Yeah, it's gone from 3 billion in absolute terms to 1 billion. And as a percentage, it's just fallen through the floor. There's very few people left in the world in the condition that was the human condition for 300,000 years and up until 1800. So there's this enormous change. And I go, so that's on the left. On the right, they say, yes, those people on the left, they're all wrong. Now, it's not exploitation, it's the saving rate. The saving rate. People started in the 1700s to save more, and that means that they could accumulate capital. Notice that it's the same argument as on the left. The claim is that the source of enrichment is the accumulation of capital. Piling brick on brick, piling university degree on university degree. Piling is what causes us to be rich. That's what they said. The left said it, and so did the right. And the right said it's these virtuous entrepreneurs who save more. That's what did it. And what's wrong with that is that there's sharply diminishing returns, as economists say, to piling stuff up. If you own an automobile, that's nice, congratulations. Suppose you own 2, then your husband and you could both have an automobile. Hey, great, now we can all go. Suppose you had 3. Now the third one wouldn't be very useful. Okay, let's keep going. Suppose you had 4. Your third and fourth automobile would spend most of their time parked. The gain from having accumulation, I just said, has sharply diminishing returns. And in any case, it's not true that people in olden days didn't save much. I've done work on English agricultural history in the Middle Ages, a long time ago, 800 years ago. And people had to save upwards of a quarter of their crop in order to have the seed for next year's crop. I'm always impressed when I see photographs of so-called paddy fields in China and India and Southeast Asia. And the paddy fields are for rice. And they go up the mountain, one level and then another level. So there's this immense investment that these very poor peasants have done in making the land to hold the water so that you're going to have rice. You grow rice in water. And you couldn't, if it's just a hill, then the water just runs down the hill and you can only do it in the valley. So they go up the hill. You can see photographs of this. So it's not true that in olden days they didn't invest a lot. The Chinese had the longest canal in the world, the Grand Canal, for hundreds and hundreds of years before people in Europe had much of anything in the way of canals. Roman roads. I just learned the other day that they were often built on the basis of Celtic roads that the Celts, who once were very big in Europe, had made. But in any case, Roman roads were all over the place. Very elaborate capital accumulation. The Great Wall of China, another case. So there was lots of investment before. It's not in any way, sheer investment is no good. So what is it? I concluded the second volume of this big trilogy by arguing that it was innovation, by which I mean new ideas. New ideas. I mean, the one that we all know about is the steam engine, but good God, look around you. There are ideas, new ideas of the last 2 centuries are simply amazing. They're all over the place. You probably have, as I have in my office, I'll point it up. See there, that's called a dropped ceiling. It's dropped. See? Up in the top are all the, I don't know, plumbing and electricity and, all kinds of things hidden away by a dropped ceiling. Dropped ceiling is a very simple idea. And in office buildings all over the world, we have dropped ceilings. You're in university. Modern universities were an idea of a man named Humboldt, von Humboldt. He was an important person in Prussia. And in 1810, he said, look, we should have an institution where teaching and research goes on at the same time. The earlier universities like Paris or Oxford were just transmitting old knowledge. They weren't focused on making new knowledge. Humboldt said, no, in the modern world, we need an institution like this. So that idea was immensely productive, just as dropped ceilings or the steam engine are immensely productive. And people keep making them. Engineers, entrepreneurs, ordinary consumers often invent stuff without even knowing that they're innovators. Let me get the way cell phones are used by young people like you is not what the original inventors thought they were going to be used for. You invented it. Some kid 20 years ago started doing, I don't know, SMS messages, for example, on your phone. Those were once the code or the way that linemen in the electricity company talked to each other. They didn't talk, they wrote to each other. So they would say, look, we have to do this. You have to go here and there, and we've got to fix this electricity thing this way. And then it became the universal tool of young people. They invented it. Then in the 3rd volume, I asked, how did this happen? How is it that around 1800, especially in northwestern Europe, Holland to begin with, then Scotland and England, then the American colonies, and then it spread to the world. How did this get started? How did this innovation, I call it innovism, which is a much, much better word to describe the modern world than capitalism. It's just much better. It's scientifically better. It makes more sense because it focuses on the real cause. It's not accumulation, it's not trade, it's not improved property rights, not any of the things that you hear about in your economics courses. It's innovation. It's new ideas that come out of someone's head. Well, one more example. In the 1950s, a man named, I'm going to forget his name. Anyway, he was in North Carolina, an American, and he hadn't been to university. And he had a company that specialized in moving tobacco around, right, to the ports. And he invented containers. The containers that you in Chile send to China and get back from China on a big scale. So containerization came out of the mind of this one person whose name I forget. All right. How did that happen? I claim, and the 3rd volume gives a lot of evidence for it, that it came out of liberty. Liberty was the cause of the modern world. It didn't come out of the state or the government. It didn't even come out of science all by itself. It came out of the liberty that allowed poor people to become scientists, the liberty that allowed ordinary people to innovate. I mean, think of it, and it's not just these great inventions like steam engines and so on, or the modern university that I'm talking about. When you, as an individual, radically change your job or your business, when you open a beauty salon in your neighborhood, and you put your heart and soul into it to make it profitable, make it work, you're being an entrepreneur. You're inventing something that no one had thought of it before, that there should be a beauty salon in this particular neighborhood. When you change jobs, you're taking this leap in the dark. You're taking a chance. And that's the core of entrepreneurship, a new idea. Deirdre, I just moved from retirement to the university, to Cato Institute a couple of years ago. I'm 82 years old, so I'm back in the labor force as an old lady. That's taking a chance. So the question is, why didn't it happen before? If this is the explanation. I often criticize the other materialist explanations by saying, look, as I said a few minutes ago, capital accumulation is ancient. Trade is ancient. Law, property and contract law is ancient. It's not some new, it's not some suddenly happened and that made us rich. No. Something changed in the 18th century, very late. It's got nothing to do with Christianity or being European or anything like that. It's a change that, by what I call accidents, and we could go into it, accidents, fortunate accidents that didn't happen in Japan or China or India or the Muslim world at that time, that for various unhappy reasons, these accidents didn't happen. They're the good accidents, but a series of good accidents happened that did the following. It changed the attitude in the 18th century that the people, ordinary people, and especially the rulers, had about innovation. Innovation in English, I imagine it's true in Spanish too, was a bad word until the 19th century. You can actually find the history of this. And the very word innovation, oh no, we don't do innovation. That's too disturbing. That'll frighten the horses or something. No, we don't have innovation. But on the contrary, it became a favorable word gradually in the 18th century in places like Holland, where it had been a good word in the 17th century, and in Scotland and England in the 18th. And the rest of the society started to approve of innovism. And that was embodied in liberalism. Now, what I mean by that word is not what it means in the United States, where it means social democracy. It means a sort of mild form of socialism.
Deirdre,
that's not what I mean.
Sorry, quick question. So there was a confusion with the time, and we have 15 more minutes. So I don't know if you want to wrap up and then maybe take some questions from the students.
I'll be glad to. It's easy to do. So it's a change in attitudes among most people that caused the modern world. It's liberalism that embodies that. By liberalism, to use a phrase that I've coined, equality of permission. Women are permitted to be airline pilots. Black people are permitted to be free, and so forth. So that's what did it. It's liberty is the secret sauce, so to speak. That caused the modern world. So that's my argument. I have an ideas explanation of the modern world, not material.
Thank you very much, Deirdre. That was really good. We have some questions from the students, so if you can hang around for a few minutes.
As long as
The
you want.
questions might be in Spanish, so in case they are in Spanish, I'll try to translate them.
Okay.
Otherwise, feel free to ask questions in English if you speak English.
Hello, can you hear me, Deirdre?
Yeah, I can hear you, but make it even louder.
Okay, thank you very much for your talking. I sympathize with the conclusion of your argument and with the, and above all with the kind of methodology or argumentative style that you use that is comparing countries, times, epochs, which have the same ingredients, but for something that is liberty and that. And when I read that, I thought that that's the method basically of John Stuart Mill of difference of the canons of inference. And
you're absolutely right.
And is the method that the recent Nobel Prize in economics, Acemoglu, Johnson, and Robinson, and the credibility revolution in economics and RCTs, used to basically is trying to find, in the case of an RCT and randomized control trial, is taking two groups which are similar enough in all aspects, but one, the treatment, and there's a difference. And I think that's a very important advance in science that, there are critics and
I understand.
failures. So my question is, why are you so critic with the recent Nobel Prize winners? I read a note about that. I think that, that's...
Because look, here's why I am. Because neither of them, neither the experimental people, I mean the trial people, I'm not against experimental economics if it's in the classroom or something. There it makes sense, and people like Bart Wilson and Vernon Smith do it right, but the people who got the Nobel Prize do it wrong. In fact, what they do is unethical. Now we can go into that, but it's clumsy and it's wrong, and so too Acemoglu and his friends. His friends, by the way, don't deserve the Nobel Prize. It's silly to give the Nobel Prize to Robinson. I actually debated Robinson three weeks ago at the University of Chicago. And, he's hardly an economist. Acemoglu is an economist, but they get it wrong. They think, all three of them think, that the way forward is to make the government bigger, make coercion bigger. They say that leads to liberty. They have the nerve to call a bigger state that runs your life in more detail. They have the nerve to call that freedom. So I think their science is wrong. I don't think they're bad people necessarily, but I think their science is radically wrong. Mine is correct, theirs is false. So that's why I don't agree with them. I've got a book actually on this from the University of Chicago Press, small book, which goes after what's called neo-institutionalism, Douglas North and all that. And that's what Acemoglu and colleagues do, is neo-institutionalism. And the problem is this, as I said in my talk, ethics, opinion, ideology, that's what matters. It's the institutions are intermediate. They're in the middle. They're just, look, the Soviet Constitution, if you go read it, is very nice. It looks very nice. It says, of course we'll have free speech. Of course, of course. And then the Soviet Constitution was operated by criminals. So you got the result you got. courts where you establish property rights don't work if the judges don't have any integrity, any ethics. So I think they're both of those that you mentioned, the experimentalists and the neo-institutionalists, are gravely mistaken in their science.
Hello, my name is Lucia, and well, I'm going to try to ask you my question in English, but it's not
But
really good looking.
But please put the microphone closer to your mouth.
Like this? Yes. Yeah, like this?
Put it like you're doing rock music.
Okay, okay. But you can hear me good now.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. If it's
Okay.
close to your mouth, it'll work.
Okay, okay. Well, in the text or in the paper, statism is criticized and denoted as a threat to freedom. But my question is like, what is the limit to what the state can do without being detrimental to the permission to act or the freedom to act?
Show this in a diagram that I'm looking over here because I might have a copy of it lying around. No, I guess I don't. But I have a diagram that I used in the debate that I did with Robinson 3 weeks ago at the University of Chicago. And by the way, that's online. You can find the debate. And I said, coercion is necessary. If you've got a child, 4 years old, and he starts running into the traffic, you stop him. You grab him and coerce him. You don't, sit down and have a little discussion. You grab him, right? And that's true of a small government. There are some things that governments do well. If Argentina invades Chile, the government should stop them. If there's, certain kinds of externalities, not all of them, but some of them, the government is good at stopping. For example, plagues, serious plagues. COVID-19 was not a very good example of it, but if the bubonic plague comes back, the government is good at coercing people to get, vaccinated, right? Okay. So there are a few things the government does well, but the trouble with Acemoglu and company and most modern economists, actually, not just them, but most economists, is that they find a problem, some problem in the world, and they think, oh my God, the market can't handle it, they claim, without any evidence. They just make up the evidence. They don't have any facts to back it. They say, oh, there's this terrible problem of poverty or of externalities or lack of economic growth or something. And then they assume that the government is perfect, which is, when you think about it, is a little strange. They think that voluntary agreements among humans are imperfect, but coercion is perfect. And then the government is supposed to come in and fix it. Well, what this does, as I show in this diagram that I use, is just makes the government bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Now they recognize that there are limits. At the extreme limit of communism or fascism, they know that human welfare goes down if you go all the way to that. But they say, oh no, we're very far away from that. The people in Santiago or Washington are very intelligent, and they're gonna fix our problems. And it doesn't work very well. And we're going in the wrong direction. We have too much regulation. Actually, in Argentina now, Milei, for the next year, has the legal right to abolish every regulation he wants to. he and his team of economists, and they're going at it with a will. They're cutting what we call in English red tape and silly regulations in Argentina with a will. And Argentina is going to grow. In fact, it started to grow. It's going to grow 7% next year, according to the IMF. So, you know, that's my view.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, I'll go. Deirdre, thank you for your time. So my question is that here in Chile, the left side, they discuss that there's great inequality in Chile. But then like the right-wing political party says, we'll take Chile 30 years ago and compare it. We reduced poverty from 50 to 8%.
Yeah.
Then when you go to like a very poor district in Chile, you see a huge comparison with the other richer sides.
Yeah.
So how would you take that argument and try to convince people that there isn't great inequality, or the reduction of poverty has been great the last 30 years? How would you respond to that?
You know, all boats rise. That's the cliche in English. And think of the numbers I've given to you. $2 a day versus $50 a day. 2,500% if you allow the economy to exercise liberalism. And it happened in Chile. Now, you know, you can say, oh, it's terrible. There's still poor people in the world. Well, that's not an argument against this policy. It's an argument against the remaining obstacles. What I argue for is equality of permission, not equality of outcome or equality of opportunity, but equality of permission. And if parts of Chile are being obstructed in some way to allow themselves to raise themselves up, those obstacles should be taken away. I mean, Chile's not the worst case of this regional divergence. The worst case is in Colombia, where there are shocking differences from one part of the country to the other. And I'm not an expert in either your economy or Colombia, but what happens if you let people do it, if you let them move, if you let them innovate, let them open businesses, make it easy, is they all get rich. I mean, they don't get wonderfully rich, but they get $50 a day. So, and by the way, we have to be careful with these numbers about inequality. My own country is often accused of being very inegalitarian, but that turns out to be an accounting problem. The Department of Labor, or is it Commerce, or is it the Census, I can't remember which, that calculates this, doesn't do it the same way they do it in the OECD, in Europe and Japan and so forth. And the result is that we don't include the transfers, the help to the poor that we get from taxing me and handing it to poor people. And so actually, when you do that, you find the United States has not become more unequal, and that by comparison with other countries, it's as unequal as France is. It's no more equal than France is, or Germany. So you have to be very careful with the numbers that you see in the newspaper. But in any case, all boats rise.
Thank you very much, Deirdre. This was great. Please give Deirdre a round of applause.
And I want to come to your country again. I've been there a number of times.
Next year. Next
Yeah,
year.
sure.
Okay? So we'll
Next
invite
year.
you for sure. You'll come in person here
When
to
I-
Universidad del Desarrollo, and then we'll take you to Patagonia. I think you'll like it there.
When I get the Nobel Prize,
No. You know, it's interesting because the people who actually decry the market, those get the Nobel Prize, and they also get money.
Yeah,
The
I know.
people who support the market, they don't get money or Nobel Prizes, so don't have very high expectations, Deirdre.
I know, I don't
think you're getting. You
look,
deserve it, but you're not getting it.
I know, I'm an
Sorry
old
about
lady and I'm very wise, and I know that I'm not gonna get it.
Okay, thank you, Deirdre.
Okay, my love. Ciao, ciao.
Bye.